such a interesting week in the news. A big mystery was solved this week. You know, someone a couple of months ago was leaking very sensitive national security information on the internet. Well, this week, ladies and gentlemen, we got him. The FBI arrested a 21-year-old. National Guardsman in Massachusetts who was doing this, and I had so many questions. I want to know why a 21-year-old had access to our most secret national security stuff when most of them need to Google how to write a check. And wait, it gets more Gen Z than this. He was living with his mom. And where did he post this sensitive stuff? In an online chat room for video gamers. So we know one thing about the motivation. It wasn't to impress girls. But really, show the picture of this kid. This is who did it. Look at this. And my generation is the problem? That's him, the Intel incel. Jason born yesterday. What the fuck? Looks like someone used the de-aging filter on Mayor Pete. The Dalai Lama sucks tongues that are older than this. This kid got carded at the Super Mario Brothers movie. When they asked him for a plea, he said not guilty by reason of anxiety. I'm telling you, these kids today. And I love this part of the story. The person who identified this leaker, this 21-year-old leaker, was a teenage boy, which makes sense because all the people in the chat room were teenage boys. The 21-year-old was known as the OG. I'm not kidding. He was trying to impress them. You know what he named the group they were in, this little clubhouse? The Thug Shaker Central. Thug Shaker Central. Also will be the name of his ass when he goes to prison. Gentle good humor. That's what we do here. And I love this wrinkle in the story. Marjorie Taylor Greene is siding with the leaker. With the...
Good morning. It is Wednesday, April the 19th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have no free lunch, educational system, disrespect, Hugh Hewitt, Mark Kaye, the rape of the mind, common sense, Donald Trump, and the revolt of the elites. All that and more when I come back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Can you see by the dawn's
Thank you. And now there's No Free Lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
We seem to be getting closer and closer to a situation where nobody is responsible for what they did, but we are all responsible for what somebody else did. Thomas Sowell. This is not just a clever or cute way of identifying something so culturally frustrating to many of us. It is an inevitability in any society that allows individual responsibility to break down. The more we advocate freeing people of the responsibility of their decisions, the more we advocate transferring the responsibility of their decisions to someone else. What is not an option is that no one has to hold the bag. The piper will be paid, and all we are haggling over is whether or not the individual actor should pay or the rest of us.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Donald
idiotic,
Trump.
small-minded prosecution. This will likely all backfire. In fact, it already is backfiring. Americans are very smart people, and they see what's going on. This is a persecution disguised as a prosecution.
I would dismiss it on its face because it fails to state a crime.
The only crime that I've committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. And now these radical left lunatics want to interfere with our elections by using law enforcement. We can't let that happen. With all of this being said, and with a very dark cloud over our beloved country, I have no doubt, nevertheless, that we will make America great again.
And that was Donald Trump. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Stuart-Varney.
Education Secretary Miguel Cardona was questioned about China's influence on our education system. What did he have to say?
Nothing, really. I mean, he said he didn't know. He did not know if China was trying to influence higher education. I found that shocking, coming from the fact that, China's infiltrating our higher education universities for years now, and we just don't seem to acknowledge it or take it seriously.
Okay, so first of all, they asked the wrong question. Do you know? It should be, do you care? You should ask the education secretary, should China be involved in our education system? That's the more potent question, at least to start off with. But anyways, all of this about maybe China is getting involved, but it all comes from the idea that history, we allowed the Republicans, the conservatives in this country, and I blame good old William F. Buckley Jr., who is supposed to be the intellectual leader of the conservative so-called movement for this, that the left came out and successfully brainwashed this country into believing that history is simply political propaganda. And once you accept that it's all political propaganda, then everything's political propaganda. Mathematics is political propaganda. Civics is political propaganda, obviously. Everything becomes political. English becomes political propaganda. That opens the door to anybody and everybody meddling with our educational system. We already have one guy that did so overtly, and that was a guy that basically showed everybody else the way. And Howard Zinn, who created the so-called textbook called The People's History of the United States of America. Okay, and once you've allowed that kind of thing to happen, then the Chinese coming in and meddling in our educational system, is that a surprise? It shouldn't be. Back in a minute. Thank you. Another commercial that I think is very telling about the state of our culture.
You want one of these?
I'm good, KG.
You want your ginger shot?
I'm good, man. I'm good.
I need some positivity today. I'm trying to cover this spread, and your vibe is off, G.
What's wrong with my vibe?
You got to get you one of these, G. Get to sip some of this positivity in your life, and boom! You see that? Spread's covered. Thank you, Mama. In a minute, G.
So, again, the issue is here is G. That in our culture, everything becomes informal, more and more informal. So everybody gets a nickname. Everybody's G or boss. And that's disrespectful. It is disrespectful. And if you're in this position where you have somebody, particularly somebody you don't know or don't know very well, that is calling you G, acting as though you're buddies or friends when you're really not, you need to consider putting them in check, so to speak, by confronting them about it and saying, excuse me, my name isn't G. My name is whatever. And I would prefer that you call me so-and-so. And if you have to, you should consider walking away. If they won't do it, don't submit. You don't have to submit to disrespectful behavior, even though our culture seems to demand it. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the retreat to automation in the rape of the mind.
The retreat to automation. Introverted schizophrenics prefer the automatic, routine life of the asylum to life of the outside world, on the condition that they be allowed to indulge their private fantasies. They surrender utterly to self-defeatism. They never congregate in groups. They seldom talk with one another. Even when they do, they never have any real mutual contact. Each one lives in his own retreat. In the totalitarian myth, think, for instance, of das Dritte Reich. In the psychological folklore of our mythical state, the vague fantasy of the technically perfected womb, the ideal nirvana, plays a tremendous role. In the world full of insecurities, a world requiring continual alert adjustment and readjustment, totalitaria creates the delusion of omnipotent, miraculous, ideal state. A state where, in its final form, every material need will be satisfied. Everything will be regulated, just as it was for the fetus in the womb. The land of bliss and equanimity, just as it is for the schizophrenic in the mental hospital. There is no social struggle, no mental struggle. The world moves like clockwork. There is no real interplay between people, no clash of opinions or beliefs. There is no emotional relationship between these womb fellows. Each exists as a separate number-bearing entity in the same filing system. In totalitaria, there is no faith in fellow men, no caritas, no love, because real relationships between men do not exist, just as they do not exist between schizophrenics. There is only faith in and subjection to the feeding system, and there is in every citizen a tremendous fear of being expelled from that system, a fear of being totally lost, comparable with the schizophrenic's feeling of rejection and fear of reality. In the midst of spiritual loneliness and isolation, there is the fear of still greater loneliness, more painful isolation. Without protective regulations from the outside, internal hell may break loose. Strong mechanical external order must be used to cover the internal chaos and approaching breakdown. We've had experience in post-war years with several refugees from the totalitarian world who broke down when they had to cope with a world of freedom, where personal initiative was required. The fear of freedom brought them to a state of panic. They no longer had strong enough egos to build and maintain their defenses against the competitive demands of free democratic reality. As in schizophrenia, a maneuverable and individual ego cannot exist in totalitaria. In schizophrenia, the ego shrinks as a result of withdrawal. In totalitaria, as a result of constant merging in mass feelings. If such a shrunken ego should grow up with its own critical attitude, its needs for verification of facts and for understanding, it would then be beaten down as being treacherous and non-conforming. Totalitaria requires of its citizens complete subjection to and identification with the leader. It is this leader dominance that makes people nearly egoless, as they are in schizophrenia. This again may result in loss of control of hostile and destructive drives. Psychologists have seen this time and time again in what we can call the concentration camp psyche. When the victims first came to the camp, dedicated to their gradual extermination, Most of them displayed a complete loss of self, an utter depersonalization, combined with apathy and loss of awareness. The same observations have been made among our POWs in Korea. Some concentration camp victims got better immediately after their return to a normal society. In others, this schizophrenic reaction of lost ego remained and, as we mentioned above, sometimes developed into a real psychosis.
And that was The Retreat to Automation from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, MD. Thank you. And so now, a new book, and it's a national bestseller, The Revolt of the Elites and the Betrayal of Democracy by Christopher-Lasch, who wrote a book that I read about narcissism in America. So this is going to be chapter 1. It's about almost 40 minutes long, so I'm going to divide it up into 4 segments. So this will be the first segment, about 10 minutes long.
This is Audible.
Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents The Revolt of the Elites and the Betrayal of Democracy by Christopher-Lasch, narrated by David DeVries. 1. Introduction. The Democratic Malaise. Most of my recent work comes back in one way or another to the question of whether democracy has a future. I think a great many people are asking themselves the same question. Americans are much less sanguine about the future than they used to be, and with good reason. The decline of manufacturing and the consequent loss of jobs, the shrinkage of the middle class, the growing number of the poor, the rising crime rate, the flourishing traffic in drugs, the decay of the cities, the bad news goes on and on. No one has a plausible solution to these intractable problems, and most of what passes for political discussion doesn't even address them. Fierce ideological battles are fought over peripheral issues. Elites, who define the issues, have lost touch with the people. Refer to Chapter 2, The Revolt of the Elites. The unreal, artificial character of our politics reflects their insulation from the common life, together with a secret conviction that the real problems are insoluble. George Bush's wonderment when he saw for the first time an electronic scanning device at a supermarket checkout counter revealed, as in a flash of lightning, the chasm that divides the privileged classes from the rest of the nation. There has always been a privileged class, even in America, but it has never been so dangerously isolated from its surroundings. In the 19th century, wealthy families were typically settled, often for several generations, in a given locale. In a nation of wanderers, their stability of residence provided a certain continuity. Old families were recognizable as such, especially in the older seaboard cities, only because, resisting the migratory habit, they put down roots. Their insistence on the sanctity of private property was qualified by the principle that property rights were neither absolute nor unconditional. Wealth was understood to carry civic obligations. Libraries, museums, parks, orchestras, universities, hospitals, and other civic amenities stood as so many monuments to upper-class munificence. No doubt this generosity had a selfish side. It advertised the baronial status of the rich, attracted new industries, and helped to promote the home city against its rivals. Civic boosterism amounted to good business in an age of intense competition among cities, each aspiring to preeminence. What mattered, however, was that philanthropy implicated elites in the lives of their neighbors and in those of generations to come. The temptation to withdraw into an exclusive world of their own was countered with a lingering awareness, which in some circles survived even the riotous self-indulgence of the Gilded Age, that all have derived benefits from their ancestors, as Horace Mann put it in 1846, and that therefore all are bound, as by an oath, to transmit those benefits, even in an improved condition, to posterity. Only an isolated, solitary being, having no relations to a community around him, could subscribe to the arrogant doctrine of absolute ownership, according to man, who spoke not only for himself, but for a considerable body of opinion in the older cities, in much of New England, and in New England's cultural dependencies in the Old Northwest. Thanks to the decline of old money and the old money ethic of civic responsibility, local and regional loyalties are sadly attenuated today. The mobility of capital and the emergence of a global market contribute to the same effect. The new elites, which include not only corporate managers, but all those professions that produce and manipulate information, the lifeblood of the global market, are far more cosmopolitan, or at least more restless and migratory than their predecessors. Advancement in business and the professions these days requires a willingness to follow the siren call of opportunity wherever it leads. Those who stay at home forfeit the chance of upward mobility. Success has never been so closely associated with mobility, a concept that figured only marginally in the 19th century definition of opportunity. Chapter 3, Opportunity in the Promised Land. Its ascendancy in the 20th century is itself an important indication of the erosion of the democratic ideal, which no longer envisions a rough equality of condition, but merely the selective promotion of non-elites into the professional managerial class. Ambitious people understand, then, that a migratory way of life is the price of getting ahead. It is a price they gladly pay, since they associate the idea of home with intrusive relatives and neighbors, small-minded gossip, and hidebound conventions. The new elites are in revolt against Middle America, as they imagine it, a nation technologically backward, politically reactionary, repressive in its sexual morality, middlebrow in its tastes, smug and complacent, dull and dowdy. Those who covet membership in the new aristocracy of brains tend to congregate on the coasts, turning their back on the heartland and cultivating ties with the international market in fast-moving money, glamour, fashion, and popular culture. It is a question whether they think of themselves as Americans at all. Patriotism certainly does not rank very high in their hierarchy of virtues. Multiculturalism, on the other hand, suits them to perfection, conjuring up the agreeable image of a global bazaar in which exotic cuisines, exotic styles of dress, exotic music, exotic tribal customs can be savored indiscriminately, with no questions asked and no commitments required. The new elites are at home only in transit, en route to a high-level conference, to the grand opening of a new franchise, to an international film festival, or to an undiscovered resort. Theirs is essentially a tourist's view of the world, not a perspective likely to encourage a passionate devotion to democracy.
And that was the first part of Chapter 1 of The Revolt of the Elites and the Betrayal of Democracy by Christopher-Lasch. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Mark Kaye about Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, some people have said, has declared war on certain news outlets, declared war on free speech. Elon Musk is trying to bring, I guess, the truth to light. He doesn't mind that NPR, National Public Radio, has a Twitter feed. He just wants people to know the information coming from NPR is government funded, which it is. He doesn't mind that PBS has a Twitter feed, but he wants everybody to know the tweets coming from the PBS Twitter feed are government funded. NPR, they want you to believe that they are this independent organization. They want you to believe they're this independent radio broadcast corporation. They're not. This is reading directly from their website. Public radio and federal funding. Federal funding is essential to public radio service to the American public, and its continuation is critical. Now, by labeling something critical, it means if you don't get it, you won't survive. So federal funding, as NPR says on their own website, is critical to their existence. Elon Musk...
And that was, again, Mark Kaye talking about Elon Musk and National Public Radio. Back in a minute. Thank you. So listening to Hugh Hewitt this morning, and one of the things that he said really jumped out at me is being deterministic. And this is, again, how brainwashed we all are, because we use deterministic principles and we don't even know it. It's just very automatically. So they were talking him and his guests were talking about a case called New York Times v. Sullivan, in which the ruling of the court was that basically it gave the people in the news business the right to defame anybody they want to. At least it's a public figure. If they're a public figure, you can defame them all day long, every day, and you're held unaccountable. So they become, in essence, super citizens. And so it's badly decided, it's wrong, and it should be overturned or modified at the very least. So, anyways, Hugh Hewitt says, no, I like... and of course he throws in that he teaches con law, and he was teaching, which means constitutional law. So he has to be hip and refer to everything by a nickname, con law. That's what the hippies do. He's not a hippie, he shouldn't do that. Refer to it as constitutional law, and he was talking about New York Times v. Sullivan. He said he's glad it's there, it should stay there because it has saved him from a lot of nuisance lawsuits. A lot of little nuisance lawsuits. And at first blush, it sounds good. The problem is, it's crap. It's determinism. What he is suggesting is that if New York Times v. Sullivan is taken away, that people will automatically start suing him. No, they're not going to automatically start suing him. What it really means is that he will now have an added pressure or burden of being more accurate, okay, and not being sloppy and slandering or otherwise, or libeling or otherwise defaming people, at least people in public life. First of all, that's one of the things it means. It also, he is assuming that people will be forced to sue him. That all these people will all of a sudden be forced by the absence of this law to sue him. No, it's ridiculous. People do things of their own free will, first of all, okay? So anybody that sues him is going to sue him of their own free will. Second thing is, nobody wants to go to court, okay? The only people that want to be in court is the judge and the stenographer and maybe the bailiff, and that's it. Nobody else wants to go to court. The lawyers don't even want to go to court. Okay, that's why they settle cases. The cases get settled, like 95% of cases that are brought end up getting settled. Because even the lawyers don't want to go to court. The plaintiffs don't want to go to court. The defendants don't want to go to court. Nobody wants to go to court. Plus, there's other remedies or other ideas. One of the things, you have to exhaust your administrative remedies. You can't just say, oh, well, he wrote something about me, so now I'm going to go sue him. You have to issue what's known as a demand letter. I demand that you retract. And if they retract and correct, you're done. Okay? It's an administrative remedy. So he's assuming that he's taking a lot for granted. And again, he's assuming and presuming determinism, that if the law is removed, people will be forced to sue him. Wrong, 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 wrong. Back in a minute.
Here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not, 'cause the dreams bring back all the memories of everything we've been through. Close to the ones here today, close to the ones that we lost on the way, 'cause the dreams bring back all the memories, and the memories bring back you. There's a time that I remember when I did not know no pain, when I believed in forever and everything would stay the same. Now my heart feel like December.
This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So I'm reminding you that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.